This is the Aces Up Your Sleeve podcast, and we're the aces up your sleeve in relationships, from romantic to workplace, parental to platonic, your relationship with yourself, and everything in between. Let us, two autistic, aspect, kinky therapists, be your secret weapon in neurodivergent life.
And here's your disclaimer. This is not therapy or therapeutic advice, and we're not on the clock. What you'll hear are our thoughts on different topics, what we might do in your shoes, and how we've supported others through similar situations.
Hello and welcome to the Aces Up Your Sleeve podcast. I'm your host, Cade.
And I'm your host, Sabrina.
Hopefully you'll find some good use in what we're about to talk about today. This is our second episode in our 3-part series for teens. So we're talking about teens because on May 16th, we're going to be participating in the very first virtual GEMS Neurodiversity Summit. Our focus this time is working with autistic and ADHD teens as therapists. So Sabrina's going to be talking about things like how to tackle sessions that feel difficult due to maybe like a pretty quiet client or a bored client. I'm going to be covering stuff around like reducing ableism for teens who are still grappling with like maybe a recent diagnosis about their neurotype, maybe the general tough things that happen when you're an autistic or ADHD teenager. And then our friend Jamie Roberts, who has been on the podcast before, is going to talk about the difficulties of executive functioning and the changing expectations when you've got a teen who's going into adulthood. It should be good. We also have like a Ask Us Anything type of panel for people who have our very important participant tickets. So you'll get to interact with us live at our closing panel, and you'll get a goodie bag, which will have some very cool creations from us in it, some discounts. Lots of surprises.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. We put a lot of hard work into it because this is one of those populations where, and I think we talk about it a lot, people say that they like want to be helpful, but then there's all these roadblocks. And so we're hoping to maybe help get through some of the roadblocks.
Yeah. Teens are fun to work with. You know, it's unique to adults, but they're super fun, and teens need support. You know, if we want to have a great community of adults, we've got to support our kids and teens.
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
So if anybody's listening and you're a therapist, or you want to send your therapist our way so that they can work with teens in a different way, you can go to neuropebble.com/gems-summit, or you can click on the link in our show notes when you're done listening. And early bird tickets are currently on sale. I think that wraps up April 12th, so you'll want to buy them April 12th or sooner.
I believe it's April 13th is when it wraps up, but it might be April 12th is the last day to get it.
Yeah, if you log in on the 13th, I think it'll be full price, which would still be cool. Like, still join us if you're, able.
It's still worthwhile. We did our best to price things accessibly, both for participants and for us, for how much work we're putting into it. And so we're going to have a dabadoo time,
Yeah. And while we're talking about teens, we thought we'd do a little more of a serious episode on self-harm, stimming in ways that hurt ourselves, stuff like that, through that lens of teenager years. So if that is something that you don't want to hear, we encourage you to take a break from the podcast, and maybe we'll see you in the next episode next Tuesday. But if you are here with us, you need to pause, step away, whatever will help you regulate. And yeah, please take care of your needs. We will be here when you unpause, or we'll be here for the next episode.
Sure.
Right. You want to jump in with the first one?
Sure. So, first question is, I'm a parent of an autistic teen, and I'm wondering where the line is between self-harm and self-stimulatory behavior. Am I meant to allow self-stimulatory behavior that causes them?
That's a common question that I get from guardians about not just their teens, but their kids as well.
Yep. Yeah, like where is the line? And I think it's so interesting because there even is a difference in the way this question is, right? Like harm versus pain. And like, where is the line of like something that causes you pain? I mean, stubbing your toe causes pain, does it harm you? Like, maybe if you break your toe,
Yeah.
like, but I think of harm much more like longitudinal and, you know, very different in some ways than like pain.
I wonder too if maybe you and I are looking at this through the therapist lens, because for us, or at least for me, when I hear the word harm, I hear it like layered with intent.
Mm-hmm.
So pain, it's like, oh, that hurt. Harm is like someone is causing pain or harm. It's a
Right.
little more complex than just brief momentary pain or the pain of losing someone. That's less about what that person is doing. Whereas when I hear
Right.
harm, I immediately am like, oh, okay, is someone harming someone else? Is someone harming themselves?
Or even like I just got home from personal training, like right before
Mhm.
we started doing this. Some of that stuff was painful. None of it was harmful.
Yeah.
That like I'm working with my personal trainer, like I have lots of chronic pain. Um and so my personal trainer is great. She's great at like, here's how to like, okay, if you're feeling this here, here's how to try instead, like take as long as you need in breaks, don't rush
Mhm.
yourself back, like those types of things. But I do experience pain during personal training, especially as I'm very new to it. So I think I'm
Yeah.
starting us off on this question with this point because I do think that like, am I meant to allow self-stimulatory behavior that causes them pain? I would say yes. Like, I'm not a huge fan of like full definitives, but I think that it likely causes you pain to watch them be in pain.
Yeah.
And like, if it is a pain that they are interested in tolerating in whatever way, like it's different if they're coming up to you and going, I keep like hitting myself in the head and it really hurts and I want to stop.
Yeah.
Versus if like they're like, no, like this is how I'm regulating and it's
Yeah,
helpful.
especially that head banging example. I know there are a lot of people who share that the pain, the like momentary pain of that is less harmful to them than the mental pain of whatever they were ruminating on, which is not always the reason they do that. But in these discussions, they talk about how they'll take that pain because it gets them out of the thought loop,
Mm-hmm.
brings them back into their body, is almost grounding, even though from the outside, you would be like, oh, I want you to stop hitting your head so that you just sit there quietly. But when they're sitting there quietly, that's when the things are ruminating. So it's a great point that,
Right.
what we think is painful, it might be, it might not be. And when we weigh it against the harm piece, sometimes the pain is, we should support the pain instead of supporting the harm.
Right. Exactly. And I think like another way to look at it is essentially like, is your question, can you please suffer in silence? Right?
Mm.
Like a lot of times we look at behavior as communication. And so someone like engaging in a stim that like is either self-harming or causing them pain or whatever is whatever in whatever way like helping them and serving them. And so getting curious about that first before trying to do anything to like curb or change it. um if it's a genuinely dangerous stim, so or like self-harming, for example, anytime that I'm working with someone who engages in anything cutting related or things that like you know open skin,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm looking at, do we have clean implements? Do you have a knowledge in some way of the safest places on your body to engage in that? If it's not suicidal self-harm, then how do we keep it not suicidal self-harm, and not accidentally go into, what depth is it, especially for folks who might have a higher pain tolerance because of sensory differences, right? Like, okay, what depth can I safely do this at that won't require medical attention? What do I know the first aid, and do I have the tools that I would need for first aid for like minor um, cuts or scrapes or things like that? So that's what we call harm reduction. And part of that is, okay, I'm going to work my best to not have unintended consequences, right? So, like, if I'm self-injuring, I don't want the consequence of having to go to the hospital. I don't want the consequence of, like, accidental death. I don't want the consequence of long-term, like, whatever. And so because of that, I'm going to, like, know these pieces of information and be prepared and, like, use a clean implement, use a sharp implement, all of those types of things. And that's actually safer, right? Um, Rather than just going like, well, you shouldn't do that, so stop.
Absolutely. So if a guardian is listening right now and has a same or a similar question or the same question, maybe instead what we're looking at is how can you support them in reducing harm if there is harm. But again, that first step is figuring out like what's leading to this, because there could be a lot of things leading to that that are not related to harm and that are not related to suicide. I think that is something people jump to, is that any type of self-harm, if that's what it looks like, sounds like, seems like, equates to suicidality.
Yes. There's a huge difference. I did a training for a group practice a while back about like working with non-suicidal self-harm, because
Mhm.
it's really important to recognize when self-harm is non-suicidal. It is a whole different ballgame than when you're, like, working with someone who is suicidally engaging in self-harm. Um, and too many people treat it very similarly.
Yeah. And the question about the line between self-harm and self-stimulatory behavior, sometimes they're one and the same, and sometimes they're very different. And again, it's that like intent piece that is what's going to inform us as to what's happening, and we've got to ask. And then how
Mhm.
we handle it, like Sabrina's saying, could look very different based on what you find out there.
Yeah, I think there's also going to be situations where there isn't a huge line, where, like, someone is getting both things out of it, where someone is, like, because again, so self-stimulatory behavior is regulatory behavior. So is self-harming. Like, there's research around how, like, people tend to report that they're engaging in self-harming because it reduces suicidal thoughts. It helps them feel more in control. It uh, reduces the intensity of their emotions. There's a bunch of different ways that it is regulatory. And so you're asking what's the line between a regulatory behavior and a regulatory behavior. And the way that these things are worked, right? So a self-harming and a self-stimulatory behavior is that one is socially acceptable and the other one's not. Like, that's the line. That's the difference. Is that, like, we, especially in the autistic community, have accepted self-stimulatory behaviors and we have not yet accepted self-harming behaviors. And when it comes to a teenager, that's even more scary, as the adults in their lives who are charged with keeping them safe. I think a lot of it comes down to there's not necessarily a huge difference. What you can look at is how can we make sure that there is safety regardless. If your self-stimulatory behavior is running around, that's great. If you're doing that in the middle of the highway, that's great. Let's do that somewhere else. Let's find a field, like a forest, a bedroom, like something else, right? That's essentially what we're doing in that same way with self-harming.
Absolutely. And I appreciate the like chance to expand on this, because I think you're right. In some ways, stimming is less stigmatized than it has been in the past, especially in our community and related
Mm-hmm.
ones. But there are some forms of stimming that are still very stigmatized. So, you mentioned
Absolutely.
the like running around or eloping. Depending on where you're running around, yeah, that's still kind of got some stigma attached. And if you're punching walls, doors, someone, yourself, that's a little more stigmatized than maybe flapping your hands or rocking,
Fidgeting.
spinning,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, fidgeting. So I think we still have a lot of work to do in reducing the stigma, but yeah, questions like this are helpful because then we can talk about it and we can spread that info, and then you all can go and spread the info to the people you know, and hopefully that'll decrease the negative perceptions of what people are doing.
I also think a big thing here is to, as with a lot of things with teens, do your best to avoid shame, right? Like,
Yeah.
doing your best to not say, like, oh my God, how could you do this to yourself? Or, oh, like, it hurts me so much to see you do this to yourself. Like, those are comments for your friends and support system and therapists, and not for your team. while they're also dealing with whatever they're dealing with. Um, and so trying to figure out, like, okay, how can I communicate that, like, my hope is for your safety, and that, like, the way that you're engaging with yourself makes sense. Um, is there a middle ground that we can find to that end, right? But that, like, for teenagers, it doesn't usually work well to have some form of shame. So I think, like, finding that line again, we just want to be really mindful that, like, the goal of finding the line isn't so that one is bad and one is good. Like, one is not okay and one is okay.
I don't know if you see this a lot, but I do find that when the guardian kind of shifts gears and says, like, but how could you do this to me, or in front of your sibling, or before our family get together, or at our family get together, whatever it is that sort of centers the adult or the family, it opens this conversation where the teen starts going, well, you drink, you scream at someone at the family get together, you step outside and smoke. Yeah. Yeah. Or I hear you doing XYZ. Why can't I?
Auntie so-and-so, it's their kid.
Yeah.
Like,
which it's much more productive to be like, hey, how can I support you, teenager, than why are you doing this to me?
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think that, like, to that point, it feels weird to stand in a supportive stance toward self-harming. Like, and I think that that is one of the big things that I see is, like, but I can't just be okay with them doing it. And I get that. Because, I also understand, like, hey, you certainly don't want your kid running around going, like, yeah, my mom was totally cool with the fact that I cut. Okay, hang on. I am supportive of you taking care of yourself in the way that you need to safely. And I am not, like, shaming you for it. I do think that, like, that fear of that narrative can sometimes push us further to one side, and not usually the helpful side. And so doing what you can as well to really, like, hey, to the degree that you can, remember what it was like to be a teen. You had a different teenagerhood than your kid did. So, like, just because you didn't self-harm doesn't mean that it doesn't make any sense that they do. But just remember, like, when was the last time you had to fucking ask to go to the bathroom? Like, when someone else was in control over your, like, bodily functions in that way. Because I know it hasn't happened to me since I was a teenager. Like, I've maybe heard of, like, 2 or 3 other adults in, like, some big specific circumstance having to ask, some all hands meeting or whatever the hell. But, like, there is no more controlled group of people than the teens and the children, right? Than minors. And so, yeah, like, especially if your teen has been being taught bodily autonomy, this counts as that. And so trying to figure out, like, okay, it's less so, am I allowing self-stimulatory behavior that causes pain? And it's more so, am I supporting my kid effectively? So that might look like, okay, I'd really rather that you didn't self-harm. If you're going to, here's some harm reduction for whatever your methodology is. And here's an open door and a non-judgmental ear whenever you want.
Yep. Here's an invitation for whenever you're ready for a therapist. I'll let you pick one out and we'll get you over there. Because another goal tends to be not just how can we allow people to, or, like, support them to do these things safely. The other goal is usually what are some other needs that are unmet, and how can we meet those needs? I know for a lot of the folks that I've worked with, when they feel like they have a strong friend group, when they feel like they've got some interests and hobbies and are out there doing some activities, the need to do some of the self-stimming behaviors that are more painful, or to self-harm, those tend to decrease. I'm not going to say they vanish, but they just have so many other, like, things on their plate and interests and people to talk to and interact with, that the time for that specific, like, almost ritual shrinks, and they don't always think of it as often.
Yep. Yeah. It is hard, but like in a very similar way to what we see in a lot of like disordered eating. There's like a control aspect that once they do genuinely have more control over their life, like it doesn't work to be like, but you do have choices and you do have control, because like they don't. They do ish. And teens especially have an acknowledgement of like, in 2 years I'll be able to make this choice for myself. And it is just like it, even to the point of like one day they cannot vote, and the very next they can. Like that's how we count this shit. It is completely one day you cannot join the army, and the next you can. One day you cannot do this, and the next you can. Like that is how, and they're aware of that. They know it. They're like, yeah, next fucking month I'll be able to decide if I get a tattoo. So, you know what? Like, what are you fucking talking about here? It doesn't work to be like you don't actually have control. They don't. Right?
Yeah.
And so leaning in and being willing to say like, hey, it absolutely sucks that you don't have control of this now. Trying to give as much control as you can, as much choice as you can, honoring what they want and not just what you want or what other adults want out of them. But then, yeah, a lot of times, not all of the time, but a lot of times I do see the more control somebody has over the life, the less they engage in like specifically self-harm types of behaviors.
Absolutely. And in line with what you were just saying, we have another question from presumably a teen or young adult. It says, my parents keep threatening to ground me anytime I cut. I seriously can't stop though, and now my boyfriend broke up with me, so it's even worse. If I get grounded, I can't use my phone or send snaps, so I basically have no friends and no one who gets me, so what do I do? That's a prime example of someone with not many resources and not much control, and yeah. And a prime example of just telling someone to stop isn't going to make something stop. You know, like it sounds like this person's going through a really hard situation that is just getting worse, and then the threat is you're going to be cut off from your friends and
your support
internet
system.
Yeah.
Yeah. My mom was also a big fan of the I'm gonna take your phone. And her thing was like, it's the only thing that works. I'm like, first of all, no, it's not. Second of all, it doesn't actually work. It makes me feel more isolated. Like, if there is any way to allow a team to continue access to their support people, I think that's a hugely important thing.
Especially, in this scenario, I have no one who gets me. We've got to find some people for you that get you, whether that is a therapist that enjoys working with teens and young adults, or whether that is a school counselor or a single teacher there, like somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it sounds like it's made even harder by the fact that like your parents are looking at this as something to threaten and punish.
Yeah.
If it is helpful to you and you'd like to play this to your parents, I will say this for them now. Punishments do not actually extinguish behaviors. Period.
No.
We know that. Behaviorists have done the studies, and each one of them has been debunked and fucked over. It doesn't stand up. It might extinguish the behavior for a time, and then it will come back.
Yeah. Well, and what I see often is whether it's an adult with like a work related, like if you don't XYZ, then you're on probation, or if you're on probation now and if you don't XYZ, you're fired, or this type of situation with a kid or a teen. When we try to hold it together so tightly and meet those expectations that are not realistic for us, eventually we really snap. And that could be meltdown, that could be the self-harm getting worse in ways that are doing more harm and damage in the long run. That could be crisis type stuff happening, elopement, running away, finding other ways to meet those needs at school or wherever, people are going. So I would really encourage people not to be punishing any behaviors out of anyone.
Yep, totally agree. I think I'd say if you seriously can't stop, that makes sense. I understand. We did talk a little bit in the first part of this. That was a question by a parent, so you might not have listened. But about harm reduction. if you're interested in it being as safe as it can be for you, making sure that you're using something clean, making sure that if you use the same thing with which to cut, that each time you clean it or you get a new one, whatever that looks like, that it's kept somewhere safe and sanitary, like not just rolling around in your bed, but like somewhere safe, and that you're like being as clean as possible, because like infection is just something you don't want to deal with at all. That is not gonna get you the things that you're looking for.
Yeah, and often it ends up with like an ER visit or hospital trip, urgent care, something like that, which just, if your parents are the ones driving you, it just brings it up even more.
And could end up with an involuntary um, commitment, which we don't want.
No. No, and not to say that if there is an infection, you shouldn't go to the hospital, but definitely let the staff know that it was not, the intent was not to kill yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and just be very firm on that, assuming that that was not the intent.
Yep.
This is hard. Like your boyfriend broke up with you. It makes me wonder for you, you're saying like, what do I do? If there's no one that gets you right now and your support system has shrunk a bit, I do wonder, are there other outlets that might feel better than no outlet? Like, are you big on writing, and could you do it in a way that kind of disappears after a bit so that parents aren't tempted to check in on that? Or how about art, where you don't even have to use any words or reference anything in particular? You could create something that seems very unrelated to what's going on in your life, but actually is a beautiful metaphor for it, or representation of it.
Yeah. And when
Music.
Kate says something that disappears somehow, like ripping up a piece of paper disappears it. At least like makes it too difficult to read, especially if you split up those papers between trash cans.
Yep.
So like some in the kitchen trash can, some in your bedroom, some in the garage, some at school. That
If you use
disappear
ink, you
fast.
get it real soggy in the sink afterwards, and then split it up. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to. I know some people also learn how to write in codes or make up their own alphabets. Like, there's stuff you could do if you're worried at all about privacy.
Mm-hmm. I also, if you have a therapist,
Yeah.
whenever my teen clients come to me and are like, my parents are doing X, Y, Z, my very first move is to understand and then to try to figure out, like, okay, how do we together talk to your parent about how ineffective what they're doing is? And so it might be worthwhile, if your therapist is understanding, if you have one, to see if they can try to back you up. It might be something that even like the school social worker or counselor might be able to help you with. If you feel comfortable going to them. If you don't, you could also maybe, like, if you don't feel comfortable because you don't know them well, you might be able to just start saying, like, hey, I'd like to talk with you sometimes, and try to kind of test the waters and see how you feel, build some trust and rapport there, and see how that goes. But if you can find a trusted adult who might be more understanding, especially someone who your parents might trust. Like, there's something called the white lab coat effect, where parents trust professionals. It's so annoying. It's like really, really annoying until the exact moment that it's not, because you get a professional in your corner who's willing to say the things. Um, but if you can get a professional to say the things to your parents about how cutting you off is not effective or helpful, about how like self-harm engagement is really painful for parents to watch and also makes a lot of sense for teenagers. And that there's more options than yes, I self-harm, or no, I don't. Um, that might be like a decent path to go down as well. Maybe seeing if your friends are willing to write you things or make you art when you do have your phone taken away, so that you can at least get something that feels like you're cared about. Um, it's old fashioned, but like be a pen pal with your friends.
Yeah,
I also
something to.
think,
Yeah, like keep that connection going. I get what you're
yeah,
saying. Yeah, it's so important.
yeah, and just if your parents have any capacity for reasonableness in them. I don't know your parents, so I don't know if they do. Not all parents do. It sucks. If they do, flat out having a conversation like, I would like you to understand the full extent of the impact of this. I would like to know what your goal is in taking my phone. Well, we want you to stop cutting and da da da. Okay, I can understand that. I would like you to know that this has the opposite effect. Leaving me alone by myself with no support system for days makes me more have more self-harm thoughts and more freedom to act on it because I don't have anyone to talk to instead. Well, you could do. I hear you. Those things have not helped me yet. What has helped so far is being able to talk to my friends when I'm able. And really just to the best of your ability, show up with here is how this is impacting you. Very realistically. If you have a goal, you're not meeting it. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't.
Well, and maybe we don't have to get into it a ton, but I know in DBT there are some certain ways of phrasing things that are proven to be a little more effective.
Yeah.
So maybe in the show notes we can link some of that. I don't know if it's the please or the dear man or the give, or if it's kind of all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So please is emotion right, but dear man is how you ask for things effectively. So it's or say no. It's describe. So explain the facts. Get on the same page together. Express. Tell the person how you're feeling using I statements. Assert or ask. So what are you wanting out of this? Yeah. R is reinforce. What are they going to get out of it? And so this one's a nice one. For teens, my biggest reinforce is usually we will have a stronger relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that I will put effort into reaching out to my friends or my support system more if I can maintain access to them. Right? Yeah. I can't guarantee you that I will never cut again. I can guarantee you that I will put effort into reaching out. Things like that, right? So that's your reinforce. What are they getting out of it? And then the man is about kind of how to show up. So remain mindful, stick to the topic at hand. Don't let them pull you off and your grades are low. That's not what we're talking about. Right?
Now we're just focusing on
so unsafe. I hear that you feel that I'm unsafe, and then reorient to. And what we're talking about right now is that without my support system, I am made even more unsafe. I want to understand why it is that you are wanting me to not have my phone all these things, right? The second A in Dear Man is act confident, essentially. This can get a little ableist. A lot of DBT can. But you're looking to essentially know what you're going to say and believe that you have a right to say it. If this means practicing, practice. Write it out if you need to. You could even write it in a letter to them and then leave it on the kitchen table and ask them to read it and go off to school if you think that they could use some time to read it without you there. All of those types of things can help you to feel more confident in what you're saying. And then the N is negotiate. Be willing to give to get. So you might say, okay, can I have my phone for 3 hours in between after I finish my homework and going to bed to be able to have access to my support system? I will go to therapy, and one of my support system people will be my therapist in my phone, and I will maintain access to that therapist through my phone. Right? Some of these different things. But only ever negotiate with what you're actually willing to give. If you are not willing to do the thing, don't say that you are, because they will hold you to it and it will crumble.
Or if you're willing to do the thing, but realistically you can't, it's okay to not offer that either. If you realistically can't, don't worry about that.
Yep.
Pick something that you realistically can.
Right. That's why you don't guarantee that you'll never self-harm again.
Yeah.
I've never met anyone who knew it was the last time ever they were going to self-harm.
No. And another thing that may come up in this conversation or back and forth with parents is well, the phone's a privilege. And you can acknowledge that I know that and I'm grateful for it. And it's one of my biggest ways to access my support system. It's a coping mechanism for me right now. I've got, I don't know if you have apps on there that are also supporting you. There's lots of mindfulness ones. There's lots of ones about putting out your feelings. There's so many different ways that a phone or any piece of technology can be supportive that, although yes, it's usually quite expensive and a privilege, that doesn't negate the fact that it's a helpful tool for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really hard when it's, again, like, this is one of the ways we were talking about before of like teens are controlled. Because I don't know anyone who would look at me and be like, well, your phone's a privilege. Half of my work is done off of my phone. You know, and not to mention all of my social connections, both work related and unwork related. Again, my therapist is on my phone. You don't contact my phone. And so we would never, like, that. This is not something that like your boss is going to come take your phone. Like, that's ridiculous. No. But with teenagers, we for some reason think that it's appropriate, and now your phone's a privilege. It's a right for everyone else. Yeah. So look what's happening here. So if you feel frustrated by that idea, like acknowledging that your phone is a privilege, that makes sense. That's understandable.
Yeah.
Being able to acknowledge that they do have control over whether you have access to your phone is what we're aiming for.
Yeah. Well, and I wish you luck, and anybody who's listening that's in a similar boat, that's hard. And hopefully one day it will not be an issue. You know, there will hopefully come a day where your guardians won't have so much say and so much power over what you're doing or not doing, because that's tough when you're your own person and you're just trying to make it through the day.
Yeah. It is one of the more painful experiences I've personally had in my life, is trying to feel less alone, and through that action becoming less, like, more alone, right? Like you said, like, because I self-harm, now I don't have access to my support system. Like, that's very clearly not an effective cause and effect.
No, it does not make much sense to do it that way. But it's also a very common go-to for people, because you think that, well, they love their phone, this will motivate them to not do the thing that we don't want them doing, and it just, sadly, that logic doesn't track.
Well, it's an assumption of control, right? Yeah. They have the absolute control to not do this, and so it's a choice they're intentionally making to self-harm, and because of that, fuck them. And it's like, no, like, that's not how that works. And so I think, like, it is really, really frustrating. It gets me all the time. But that, like, oh, well, they love this, and so they'll act right if they don't have it.
No.
It's really frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll head over to Upping the Ante, which is our bonus content, and maybe we can talk more about some other reasons that teens might be self-harming, maybe some of the kind of after dark content we get into around here, and put it out there and see what you all think. So you can expect new episodes from us weekly on Tuesdays. You can find me at Cryptid Learns and Sabrina at Radical Insights Consulting on Facebook or Instagram, or you can add a .com at the end of either of those websites to find us. You can also follow the podcast over on Facebook or Instagram at Aces Up Your Sleeve Pod. That way you can interact with us and you can see when new episodes release. If you have any questions, which we would love more questions, you can send it our way over at neurokink.org/AUYS. And we're going to head over and do the exclusive bonus content. It's at patreon.com/Aces Up Your Sleeve Podcast. But you should now also be able to listen to it wherever you stream once you join our Patreon. We've got it on its own private podcast stream now. So we'll see you over there.